Hello, my name's Mike, and I'm a 35-year-old husband and father. I never thought I'd end up here, writing to strangers on the internet about my crumbling marriage. If you told me 6 months ago that I'd be questioning my wife, Jessica's, loyalty and the very foundation of my family, I'd have laughed. But life has a way of blindsiding you, doesn't it? Jessica and I have been married for 12 years. We've got a 10-year-old son, Ethan, who's absolutely obsessed with basketball. He eats, sleeps, and breathes the sport. Naturally, Jessica and I have supported him every step of the way. We even signed him up for private coaching with Coach Brad, his basketball coach. Brad was young, energetic, and seemed to genuinely care about the kids. He was the kind of guy everyone liked, or so I thought. Jessica and I were your typical suburban couple. She worked part-time as a paralegal, while I managed a hardware store. We weren't the kind of people who had explosive arguments or dramatic makeups. Ours was a steady, predictable love, a partnership that had weathered life's storms. Or so I believed. It all started with little things. Jessica began spending more time at Ethan's practices, even when I couldn't make it. She'd gush about how Coach Brad had really helped Ethan's game, and how the team respected him. I thought it was sweet, her getting so involved. I'd tease her about being the team's biggest cheerleader, and she'd just laugh it off. But then she started dressing up for practices. It wasn't over the top, but it was noticeable. New makeup, hair always done, and outfits that were a little more put together than your standard mom at practice attire. I joked about it once, saying she looked like she was going to brunch with her friends, and she brushed it off, saying, "Can't a woman look nice for herself?" I didn't think much of it at first. Jessica's always been confident and stylish, so it didn't seem out of character. But as the weeks went by, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling. Ethan started talking about how cool Brad was, mentioning how Mom and Coach had funny inside jokes. I'd laugh along with him, but deep down, it struck a nerve. One Friday night, after Ethan had gone to bed, I casually asked Jessica if she wanted to grab dinner the following week, just the two of us. She hesitated, saying, "Oh, I can't. I'm helping organize the team fundraiser with Brad and the other parents." Now, I'm not the jealous type, but something about the way she said Brad's name made my stomach twist. I nodded it off, though. After all, she was just being a good mom, right? What really started eating at me was the change in her phone habits. Jessica's never been one to hide her phone, but lately, she was glued to it, laughing at texts, flipping the screen down when I walked in, and staying up late scrolling in bed. When I asked her who she was chatting with, she'd smile and say, "Just the group chat for the fundraiser." It was such a mundane excuse, but it left me restless. I trusted Jessica. She wasn't the type to do anything shady, or so I thought. In those quiet moments, lying awake at night while Jessica giggled at her phone, I felt a crack in the foundation of our marriage. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I brushed it off, telling myself I was overthinking. Jessica wasn't like that. She loved me, loved Ethan, loved the life we built. Still, I couldn't help but wonder if there was something beneath the surface I wasn't seeing. The day of Ethan's big basketball game finally rolled around, and the whole house buzzed with excitement. Ethan was extra animated at breakfast, rattling off stats about his favorite NBA players and how he planned to nail some sick layups during the match. Jessica, of course, was equally hyped, packing snacks and double-checking the camera for those all-important game day shots. I had to work that morning but promised to meet them at the gym. Jessica and Ethan left together, her car pulling out of the driveway in a flurry of cheers and Ethan's basketball bouncing around the trunk. When I arrived at the school gym later that afternoon, it was already packed. Parents filled the bleachers, chatting and clapping as the players warmed up on the court. I scanned the crowd for Jessica and Ethan but didn't see them. I figured maybe they were sitting near the court or mingling with the other parents. The whistle blew, signaling the start of the game, and I watched eagerly, hoping to catch Ethan in action. But as the game wore on, I noticed something strange. I hadn't seen him on the court once. I squinted, searching for his signature number 23 jersey, but it was nowhere to be found. By halftime, I started to feel uneasy. I pulled out my phone and texted Jessica. Me. Hey, where are you guys? I don't see Ethan playing. Her response came almost immediately. Jessica. We're here. I'm sitting with the other moms. Ethan's on the bench right now, taking a break. Relieved, I scanned the sidelines. Sure enough, there was Ethan, or at least someone who looked like him, sitting at the far end of the bench with his back to the crowd. I felt silly for worrying. The second half of the game flew by, with Ethan's team pulling off an incredible win. After the final buzzer, I made my way through the throng of cheering parents to find Jessica and Ethan. She was chatting with Coach Brad, her laugh carrying over the noise of the crowd. When I finally found Ethan, he looked a little flushed, like he'd been running around. I ruffled his hair and said, "Hey, buddy. Great game, but I didn't see you on the court much." Ethan looked up at me, confused. "What do you mean?" "I was there the whole time. Maybe you just didn't notice me." His words hit me like a brick. I knew I'd been watching closely. I would have noticed him. Wouldn't I? Jessica chimed in, her voice light and cheerful. "Oh, Mike, you must have been distracted. Ethan played great." She nudged Ethan playfully. "Didn't you, champ?" Ethan nodded but didn't say anything more. Something about his expression didn't sit right with me. As we walked to the car, Ethan seemed unusually quiet. Normally, he'd be buzzing with post-game energy, replaying every highlight in painstaking detail. But today, he barely spoke. "Everything okay, bud?" I asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "Yeah," he said softly, staring out the window. "I'm just tired." Back at home, the unease I felt at the game lingered. Jessica seemed perfectly normal, chatty and upbeat, recounting the game's highlights while scrolling through her phone. But Ethan's odd comment kept playing in my mind, "Maybe you just didn't notice me." Why would he say that? I'd been watching the game like a hawk, keeping an eye out for him the whole time. And yet I hadn't seen him. It was a small thing, a tiny crack in the smooth surface of my reality. But cracks, as I was starting to realize, have a way of growing. The weekend after the big game, something strange happened. Ethan wasn't his usual post-game self. He'd always been eager to run drills in the driveway or watch highlights of his plays with me, but he spent most of his time in his room. Jessica, however, was in great spirits. She kept mentioning how well Ethan was doing, how Brad was really helping him grow. I nodded along, though the memory of Ethan's comment, "Maybe you didn't notice me," lingered in the back of my mind. The following Friday, Jessica announced she'd be taking Ethan to practice again. "Brad says Ethan's got some real potential," she said, tying her sneakers with an almost giddy enthusiasm. "It's good for him to put in the extra work." I glanced at Ethan, who was sitting at the table, poking at his cereal. "You up for it, champ?" I asked. He didn't look up. "Yeah. Sure," he muttered, though there wasn't a trace of excitement in his voice. I brushed it off. Maybe he was just tired. Kids go through phases, right? That night, when they got back, Jessica waltzed into the kitchen with her usual energy. "Ethan's really stepping up his game," she said, grabbing a bottle of water. "Brad's so impressed." "Isn't that right, Ethan?" Ethan just mumbled something incoherent before disappearing upstairs. The next morning, I found Ethan in the garage. He was hunched over a drum set, his headphones on as he practiced a steady rhythm. My jaw dropped. "Ethan!" I called out, and he jumped, spinning around to face me. "Dad. I didn't think you'd see this," he stammered, tugging off his headphones. "What's going on?" I asked, pointing at the drums. "When did you start playing? And where did you even get these?" Ethan looked at the floor, shuffling his feet. "Mom got them for me. A couple weeks ago." "Does this mean you're not playing basketball anymore?" I asked, though I was starting to piece it together. Ethan hesitated, his face scrunching up like he was trying to figure out how much he could say. "I didn't want to do basketball anymore," he admitted finally. "I told Mom, and and she said it was okay. But she told me not to tell you, she said you'd be mad. My heart sank. Why would she say that? I don't know, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to disappoint you. I knelt down, placing a hand on his shoulder. Ethan, you can never disappoint me. If you don't want to play basketball, that's fine. I just wish you told me. He nodded, relief washing over his face. I'm sorry, Dad. It's okay, Bud, I said, standing up. We'll talk more about it later. But as I walked away, my mind was racing. Jessica knew Ethan had quit basketball weeks ago, yet she'd been going on and on about practices and Brad's praise. Why? That evening, I decided to play along. When Jessica started talking about Ethan's progress, again, I nodded enthusiastically, pretending I hadn't just discovered the truth. I'd love to see one of these practices, I said casually, watching her reaction closely. Jessica froze for a split second before recovering with a smile. Oh, you don't have to do that. It's mostly just drills and boring stuff. You'd hate it. Still, I pressed, it'd be nice to see how Brad's helping Ethan improve. Jessica laughed nervously. Maybe next time. Brad likes to keep things focused, you know? No distractions. The way she avoided my gaze spoke volumes. She thought she was fooling me. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention. Jessica's enthusiasm for practice was unwavering, but her details were vague. Meanwhile, Ethan spent more time with his drum set, showing no signs of the supposed hard work he was putting into basketball. One evening, after Jessica left for yet another practice, I sat down with Ethan. Hey, champ, I said, trying to keep my tone light. How's the drumming coming along? It's great, he said, his face lighting up. And you're really done with basketball, huh? Ethan nodded. Yeah. Mom said it was okay. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. So when Mom says you're at practice with Brad, what are you actually doing? Ethan hesitated, glancing at me nervously. She usually drops me off at my drum teacher's house, he admitted. Then she says she's running errands. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. You're telling me she hasn't been at basketball practice? No, Ethan said quietly. I nodded, trying to keep my face neutral. Thanks for telling me, buddy. Don't worry, I'm not mad. Ethan gave me a tentative smile before heading back to his room. As the door closed, a knot of anger and suspicion twisted in my gut. Jessica thought she'd pulled one over on me, but she had no idea I was starting to see through the cracks. For now, I'd let her believe I was still the clueless husband. But inside, I was already planning my next move. After Ethan's confession, I felt like I was living in a parallel reality. Jessica's cheerful updates about basketball practices continued as if nothing was wrong. She'd gush about Brad's tips and Ethan's progress, while completely unaware that Ethan and I had our own little secret. The hardest part was pretending everything was fine. Every time Jessica mentioned basketball, I had to nod along like I was none the wiser. One evening, as Jessica prattled on about an upcoming parents versus kids scrimmage Brad was organizing, I decided to test the waters. Sounds like fun, I said, trying to sound excited. When's it happening? Oh, she stammered, glancing at her phone like she needed to confirm the details. Next Friday evening, I think. Brad will send out an email. I nodded slowly. Great. I'll make sure to be there. Jessica's smile faltered, just for a second, before she recovered. Sure. Ethan will love that. Would he? I thought bitterly. The kid hadn't picked up a basketball in weeks. That night, I sat in bed, staring at the ceiling while Jessica scrolled through her phone beside me. My mind was racing. If there really was a scrimmage, I'd go. But if Jessica was lying, and I had a sinking feeling she was, I needed a plan to find out the truth. The next day, I texted Ethan's old team parent group chat. Hey, I heard there's a scrimmage next Friday. Can someone confirm the time and place? It didn't take long for replies to start rolling in. Parent 1. Haven't heard anything about a scrimmage. Parent 2. Me either. Did Brad mention this recently? Parent 3. Nope. Last thing I heard was about next month's tournament. There it was, my confirmation. Jessica had made it up. I didn't confront her right away. I needed more. If she was lying about this, what else was she hiding? That week, I started paying closer attention to her patterns. She'd leave for practice with Ethan, but I noticed her route didn't make sense. Once I followed her car for a few blocks, only to watch her veer off in the opposite direction of the gym. I didn't follow her further, it felt too risky, but it was clear she wasn't where she claimed to be. Ethan, meanwhile, continued drumming happily in the garage. I didn't want to drag him into the mess, so I kept things light with him, focusing on his music and reassuring him that I supported his new passion. On Thursday evening, Jessica brought up the scrimmage again. Don't forget, it's tomorrow night, she said as she packed her gym bag. Oh, I wouldn't miss it, I replied, keeping my tone casual. Jessica gave me a tight smile, then excused herself to call Brad about the lineup. I listened as she walked into the other room, her voice dropping to a whisper as she spoke. I couldn't make out her words, but my gut told me she wasn't talking about basketball. The next evening, I told Jessica I'd meet her and Ethan at the gym after work. She seemed fine with that, her cheerful facade intact. But when I showed up at the gym, it was empty. Not a single basketball player in sight. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, the quiet gym echoing my own growing doubts. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Jessica. Jessica. Hey! Practice ran long. We're grabbing a quick bite with Brad and some parents. Be home soon. Grabbing a bite? I stared at the message, my blood boiling. How far was she willing to go to keep this lie alive? I didn't respond. Instead, I drove home and waited. When Jessica finally walked through the door, she was all smiles, carrying takeout bags. Hey! Sorry we're late. Ethan's wiped out after practice. Ethan walked in behind her, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. His hair was messy, and he had drumsticks peeking out of his backpack. You okay, buddy? I asked him. Yeah, he muttered, heading straight for his room without another word. Jessica started unpacking the takeout, oblivious to the tension building in the room. Brad says Ethan's showing real leadership on the court, she said brightly. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. That's funny. The gym was empty when I got there. Her hands froze mid-motion, and for a moment, I thought I saw panic flash across her face. But she recovered quickly. Oh, really? They must have moved practice last minute. I didn't realize. Right, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Jessica turned her back to me, busying herself with the takeout containers. I'll make sure to double-check with Brad next time. As I watched her, every instinct screamed that she was lying. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not without undeniable proof. For now, I'd let her think she was still fooling me. The day after the non-existent scrimmage, I couldn't shake the frustration eating away at me. Jessica had been so confident in her lies, spinning stories about basketball practices and Ethan's progress. Meanwhile, Ethan had practically spelled out the truth for me. That morning, as I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. Unknown. Hey Mike, it's Dave, Owen's dad. Hope I'm not bothering you. Just realized I saw you at the gym last night, but we didn't get a chance to say hi. I stared at the text, confused. I'd never met Owen's dad before, or if I had, I didn't remember. But the message caught my attention. Me. Hi, Dave. I don't think we've met before. I was at the gym, but it seemed empty when I got there. You were there too? It didn't take long for him to reply. Dave. Yeah, showed up a little late with Owen. Thought it was weird there wasn't a game. My wife told me Jessica mentioned it. Figured maybe I had the wrong night. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. Jessica had told someone else there was a game? Why? I decided to call Dave instead of texting back. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mike," he said, his voice friendly but slightly hesitant. "Sorry if I'm bugging you. Just thought I'd check in. Last night was kind of strange." No, I said quickly. "It's fine. I just wanted to clarify, what exactly did Jessica say about last night?" "Well," Dave began, "my wife was chatting with Jessica at the last game. She mentioned there'd be a scrimmage Friday night, and that it'd be a good chance for the parents to get involved. Owen and I were all set to go, but when we got there, it was a ghost town. I figured maybe plans changed, but no one sent out a notice." My grip tightened on the phone. "And you're sure Jessica said this? Not someone else?" "Positive," Dave said. "She was pretty enthusiastic about it. Honestly, I was looking forward to seeing the kids in action." I forced a laugh, trying to keep my tone light. "Yeah, same here. Guess we'll have to check the calendar more closely next time." Dave chuckled. "No kidding. Anyway, just thought I'd say hi since I saw you there, at least I think I did. You were near the bleachers, right?" "Yeah," I said quickly. "That was me. Thanks for reaching out, Dave. Let's catch up at the next game." After we hung up, I sat there, my thoughts racing. Jessica had gone out of her way to fabricate this scrimmage, not just for me, but for another parent too. Why go to such lengths? I replayed her excuses from the night before. Practice ran long, grabbing a quick bite with Brad and some parents. It didn't add up. And now, with Dave's confirmation, it was clear Jessica was weaving her lies deeper and deeper. I decided to keep quiet for now, but the pressure was mounting. Jessica might think she was clever, but the walls were closing in. A few days after my conversation with Dave, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. The missing game, Jessica's lies, and now this odd connection to his wife. It was too much to ignore. That evening, while Jessica was out running errands, I texted Dave. "Hey Dave, you free to grab a coffee or something? Been meaning to chat more about Friday." He replied almost immediately. "Sure, how about tomorrow afternoon? I've got some time after work." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near the gym. The next day, I arrived early, nursing a black coffee while my mind raced with questions. When Dave walked in, I waved him over. "Mike," he said, shaking my hand with a friendly grin. "Good to finally meet you properly." "You too," I said. "Thanks for meeting up." He grabbed his coffee, and we found a table in the corner. For a few minutes we exchanged small talk, work, kids, sports. But soon enough, the conversation turned serious. "So, about Friday," I began, leaning in slightly. "You mentioned your wife told you about the scrimmage. Did she say anything else?" Dave nodded slowly. "Yeah. She said Jessica mentioned it at the last game. But here's the weird part. When I told her I'd be coming straight from work, she got all insistent that I come earlier. Said something about wanting me there to see the warm-up." I frowned. "Warm-up? Jessica didn't mention that to me." "Exactly," Dave said, his voice dropping. "It didn't make sense. But I figured, why not? So I showed up early and, well, you know the rest. Empty gym." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us piecing things together. "You said Jessica was enthusiastic about the scrimmage," I said carefully. "Did your wife say why?" Dave shrugged. "Not really. She just said Jessica thought it'd be a good way to get the parents involved. But now that I'm thinking about it..." He trailed off, his brow furrowing. "What?" I pressed. "Well," he said, choosing his words carefully, "Lana, my wife, has been acting kind of off lately. Not in a bad way, exactly. Just different. You know what I mean?" I nodded, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "Yeah. Jessica's been the same. She's been overly cheerful, making excuses, and constantly talking about Ethan's progress when he hasn't even been playing basketball." Dave's eyes widened. "Wait, Ethan hasn't been playing?" "No," I admitted, feeling a wave of frustration. "He quit weeks ago." started playing drums instead. But Jessica's been keeping it from me, pretending he's still at practice. She even dragged Ethan into it, telling him not to tell me. Dave sat back, his coffee forgotten. Lana's been doing something similar. She's been pushing Owen harder than usual, saying he needs to impress Brad. But the other day, Owen let it slip that Brad hasn't even been running practices as often as she claimed. We both stared at each other, the realization dawning. So if there was no game, I said slowly, and Brad hasn't been running practices, then where the hell are they going? Dave rubbed his temples, looking as troubled as I felt. Lana's been coming home late, saying she's helping with team stuff or running errands. It never seemed weird before, but now... He didn't have to finish the sentence. I already knew where his mind was going. We need to figure this out, I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. Something's not adding up, and I'm tired of being in the dark. Dave nodded, determination flashing in his eyes. Agreed. Let's start with the schedule. If we can find out when Brad's actually been running practices, maybe we can figure out where our wives have really been. We spent the next hour piecing together what we knew, comparing stories and timelines. The more we talked, the clearer it became that Jessica and Lana had been weaving similar lies. The fake scrimmage, the changing schedules, the vague excuses, it all pointed to something bigger. As we parted ways, Dave clapped me on the shoulder. We'll get to the bottom of this, Mike. Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out. I nodded, though the weight of the situation was starting to settle heavily on my chest. For now, the game was still on, only this time, Jessica didn't know I was keeping score. The next day, Dave and I met again, this time at a park near the gym where everything seemed to have started unraveling. It felt oddly fitting, neutral ground for plotting what might be the most awkward and uncomfortable confrontation of our lives. Dave showed up with a notepad, which made me laugh. You're taking this seriously, I said as we sat at a picnic table under a shady tree. I'm a numbers guy, he said with a shrug. Helps me stay organized. Fair enough, I replied. So, where do we start? Dave flipped open the notepad, revealing a rough timeline he'd sketched out. Okay, let's work through what we know so far. Your wife told you about the scrimmage that didn't happen. My wife did the same. Both claimed it was something Brad organized. I nodded. Right. And both our kids confirmed Brad hasn't been running practices like our wives claimed. Exactly, Dave said, tapping his pen against the page. That means Brad's either in on the lies, or he's as clueless as we were. Either way, we need to figure out what they're really doing when they're supposedly at practice. Agreed, I said. But how do we do that without tipping them off? Dave leaned back, thinking. We could tail them. See where they actually go during these so-called practices. I shook my head. Too risky. If they spot us, it'll blow everything. Good point, Dave admitted. What about their phones? Can we check their locations? Jessica always has hers on her, I said. Unless I sneak it while she's asleep, there's no way. Same with Lana, Dave said with a sigh. Okay, so we need something that gets all of them in the same place, Jessica, Lana, and Brad. I frowned, considering the options. What if we set up a fake event? Something they can't skip? Dave's eyes lit up. Like what? I thought for a moment. What if we tell them there's a last-minute team meeting? Something urgent that requires everyone, parents, kids, and the coach. We could say it's about planning for a big tournament. Dave grinned. That could work. They've been so eager to claim they're helping the team, they'd have to show up. But we need to make it convincing, I said. We can't just tell them to meet at the gym. If they're lying, they'll know something's off. Dave jotted something down in his notepad. What if we say the meeting's at a restaurant? Make it seem like an informal planning dinner. I nodded. Yeah, something casual. And we'll tell Brad it's for the parents too, make it sound legit. That way, we'll have all three of them in one place. But how do we get Brad to believe it? Dave asked. Leave that to me, I said. I'll text him directly. I'll say it's something the parents organized and that it's important he's there. Dave looked impressed. You sure you can pull that off? I've got nothing to lose, I said firmly. If he's involved, he'll show up. And if he's not, we'll know he's being dragged into this mess just like us. We spent the next hour hashing out the details. The plan was simple. I'd text Brad about the fake meeting and give Jessica just enough information to make her think I believed her lies. Dave would do the same with Lana. The key is not letting them suspect anything, Dave said as he closed his notepad. If they catch on, we'll never get the truth. Agreed, I said, standing up. Let's set this for Friday night. Gives us a few days to get everything in place. Dave nodded, his expression resolute. Let's do it. As I walked back to my car, my stomach churned with a mix of nerves and determination. This plan might backfire spectacularly, but it was the best shot we had at uncovering the truth. Friday night arrived faster than I expected, and my nerves were in overdrive. Dave and I had carefully orchestrated everything, texting Brad and our wives about the urgent team meeting at a local family-style restaurant. We kept it vague enough to seem plausible but detailed enough to sound real. Jessica had bought the story without question. She spent the afternoon talking about how nice it'll be to have everyone on the same page for the tournament. Her tone was cheerful, even excited, and for a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. Dave texted me just before we left. Dave, Lana's all in. She even told me she's bringing a notebook to take notes. The irony is killing me. Let's stick to the plan. See you there. When we arrived at the restaurant, the atmosphere felt almost surreal. Families and friends filled the booths, laughing and eating as if the world wasn't about to tilt on its axis. Dave and I had reserved a table in a private back room. Jessica and I were the first to arrive. She glanced around the room, looking calm as ever. I wonder if Brad will be late, she said casually, pulling out her phone. I'm sure he'll be here soon, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Minutes later, Dave and Lana walked in. Lana was all smiles, greeting us warmly as she settled into her seat. This is such a great idea, she said, flipping open her notebook. Brad's been so overwhelmed lately, he'll appreciate the effort. Dave shot me a quick look, his jaw tightening, but he didn't say a word. Finally, Brad arrived. He strolled in like he owned the place, wearing his signature relaxed grin. He greeted everyone with a wave before sitting down next to Jessica. Hey folks, he said, leaning back in his chair. What's this meeting about anyway? I didn't hear anything from the team coordinator. Jessica and Lana exchanged glances, their smiles faltering slightly. Oh, it's just something we parents thought would help, Lana said quickly. You know, to support the team. Brad nodded, his grin widening. Appreciate it. Always good to have the parents involved. As the evening progressed, Dave and I played our parts perfectly. We asked Brad about upcoming tournaments, team strategies, and ways we could help. Jessica and Lana chimed in enthusiastically, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was bubbling just beneath the surface. It wasn't until dessert arrived that things took a sharp turn. Dave leaned forward, his voice casual but firm. Hey Brad, quick question. Do you remember when the scrimmage was supposed to happen? Last Friday? Brad frowned, looking genuinely puzzled. Scrimmage? We didn't have one scheduled for Friday. Jessica froze, her hand tightening around her fork. Lana, on the other hand, laughed nervously. Oh, maybe we got the dates mixed up. I could have sworn. Brad cut her off, his tone still light but laced with curiosity. Nope, I'm sure. I wasn't even at the gym Friday. Took the evening off. Dave's eyes narrowed. Interesting. Because Lana said you were there. Said it was an important game night. Lana's face went pale, her smile crumbling. I must have been mistaken, she stammered, avoiding Dave's gaze. Dave didn't let up. Really? Because you were awfully insistent I come early. Said I'd missed something important. The room went silent, the air thick with tension. Brad shifted uncomfortably, his relaxed demeanor cracking. "What's going on here?" Brad asked, his eyes darting between Dave and Lana. Dave turned to Lana, his voice cold and sharp. "Why don't you tell me, Lana? What were you really doing Friday night?" Lana's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. Brad stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Look, I don't know what this is about, but I'm not comfortable with these accusations." "Sit down, Brad," Dave snapped, his anger finally boiling over. "I'm done playing games. Lana, you've got one chance to tell me the truth." Lana broke, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Fine. You want the truth? Brad and I have been sleeping with him." "There, are you happy now?" Dave's face turned red, a mix of shock and fury. "Seeing each other? You've been cheating on me? With him? I didn't mean for it to happen," Lana sobbed. "It just happened." Brad tried to step in, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Dave, man, I don't. You dare," Dave growled, his voice trembling. Jessica sat frozen beside me, her eyes darting between the unfolding drama and her untouched dessert. I glanced at her, watching for any flicker of guilt, but her expression remained carefully neutral. For now, Jessica was still under the radar. But as Dave and Lana's argument escalated, I couldn't help but feel the walls closing in. It had been a few days since the restaurant fiasco, and Dave was still reeling from Lana's confession. He'd called me almost every day, alternating between anger and disbelief. "I keep replaying it in my head," he'd say. "How the hell did I miss the signs?" I didn't have any answers for him because, honestly, I was asking myself the same question. Jessica had managed to keep her cool through the whole ordeal, even comforting Lana as the night unraveled. She hadn't cracked, hadn't flinched. But something about her calm demeanor only made my suspicions grow. That's why I started keeping a closer eye on her. If she thought she'd fooled me, she was dead wrong. One evening, Jessica told me she was heading out to help Brad with team logistics. "Another meeting?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Yeah," she said without hesitation, grabbing her purse. "It's just some paperwork for the tournament." I nodded, watching her closely. "Need me to come along? I've got some free time." Jessica froze for just a moment, a blink and you missed it hesitation, but then she smiled. "No, it's just boring stuff. I'll be quick." I let her go, waiting a few minutes before grabbing my keys and following her. I trailed her car at a safe distance, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. She didn't head toward the gym or any of the usual team haunts. Instead, she pulled into the parking lot of a small motel on the edge of town. My stomach dropped. I parked across the street, out of sight, and watched as Jessica got out of her car. She glanced around nervously before heading inside. My hands clenched the steering wheel, my mind racing. After a few minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of my car and crossed the street, careful to stay hidden. I slipped into the motel lobby, just in time to see Jessica disappear into a room down the hall. I crept closer, my pulse hammering in my ears. When I reached the door, I could hear muffled voices inside. I leaned in, straining to make out the words. "You're driving me crazy," Brad's voice said, low and husky. "Don't I always?" Jessica replied, her tone teasing. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, but I forced myself to stay quiet. "You think Mike suspects anything?" Brad asked. Jessica laughed softly. "Mike? Please. He's so clueless, he probably still thinks Ethan's practicing free throws." Brad chuckled. "Poor guy. Meanwhile, you've been keeping me busy." Jessica's voice dropped to a sultry whisper. "You're the one who can't keep your hands off me. Can you blame me?" Brad said. "You show up looking like that. I'm only human." I clenched my fists, fury building inside me. "I told you, though," Jessica continued. "We have to be careful. Mike's been asking more questions lately." "Maybe you should just leave him," Brad said. "It'd be easier. You and Ethan could move in with me. We wouldn't have to sneak around anymore." Jessica sighed. It's not that simple, Brad. I can't just blow up my whole life. But you can sneak out and see me at motels? Brad teased. Shut up, she said, laughing. The sound of them laughing together made my blood boil. Every word was a dagger, cutting through the fabric of the life I thought we'd built together. I stepped back from the door, my mind spinning. Part of me wanted to kick it down, to confront them right then and there. But another part of me, the calmer, colder part, knew I needed to wait. If I stormed in now, it'd be a mess. I needed to think, to plan my next move. I walked back to my car, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. Jessica thought I was clueless, but she had no idea the storm that was about to hit. I drove home from the motel, my grip so tight on the steering wheel that my knuckles turned white. The conversation I'd overheard played on a loop in my head. Every word was like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. Jessica and Brad, laughing, joking, planning their next move while treating me like a fool. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my anger had boiled over. I stormed into the house, slamming the door behind me. The quiet stillness of the home we'd built together only fueled my rage. This was supposed to be our sanctuary, the place where we raised Ethan and built a life. Now it felt like a lie, a hollow shell filled with betrayal. I went straight to the bedroom, yanking open Jessica's closet. One by one, I grabbed her clothes, shoes, and accessories, throwing them into garbage bags without a second thought. Jewelry boxes, makeup, photo albums, anything that belonged to her was fair game. I worked quickly, fueled by adrenaline and fury, until the room was stripped of every trace of her. The bags piled up by the front door, and I dragged them outside, dumping them unceremoniously on the lawn. Jessica had no idea what was waiting for her when she got home. When her car pulled into the driveway a few hours later, I stood by the door, arms crossed. She stepped out, her expression carefree, until she saw the mess on the lawn. Her jaw dropped as she approached the house, her face a mix of confusion and anger. "What the hell is this, Mike?" she demanded, gesturing to the pile of bags. I stepped aside, letting her see the empty closet and dresser behind me. "This is your stuff. You're not staying here anymore." Her eyes widened, and she laughed bitterly. "You've got to be kidding me. What's gotten into you? What's gotten into me?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I know, Jessica. I know about you and Brad. The motel, the lies, all of it." She froze, her face going pale. For a moment, she didn't say anything, just stared at me as the realization sank in. "I don't know what you think you heard," she said finally, her voice trembling. "But it's not what you think." "Save it," I snapped. "I heard everything. I heard you laughing about how clueless I am, talking about sneaking around and moving in with him. Don't insult me by pretending there's another explanation." Jessica's expression hardened. "You've been spying on me? Don't turn this around on me," I said, pointing a finger at her. "You're the one who lied. You're the one who cheated." She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes, but her voice was filled with venom. "You want to know why, Mike? It's because of you. You're so wrapped up in your little world, so focused on work and routines, you didn't even notice me anymore. You didn't notice Ethan was struggling. You didn't notice I was miserable. Don't you dare blame this on me," I said, my voice trembling with fury. "I've been here, working my ass off to provide for this family, and this is how you repay me? By running off with Ethan's coach?" Jessica crossed her arms, her tears turning into anger. "You're the reason this family fell apart. You never listened, never cared. Don't act like you're some victim." I stared at her, the weight of her words crashing down on me. "You know what? Maybe I wasn't perfect. But I didn't deserve this. Ethan didn't deserve this." She looked away, her jaw tightening. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice cold. "I'll grab my stuff and go. But don't think for a second that you're some innocent saint in all this. You're just as responsible as I am." I stepped aside, letting her storm past me. She grabbed the bags from the lawn, throwing them into her car with furious energy. When she slammed the car door and sped off into the night, the house fell silent. I stood in the doorway, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Jessica was gone, and with her, the illusion of the life we built together. The silence in the house after Jessica left was deafening. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty closet that once held her clothes, the bare dresser where her jewelry used to sit. It felt like the end of a chapter, one I hadn't chosen to close but had no choice but to accept. Ethan had been in his room the whole time, headphones on, oblivious to the storm that had passed through our home. I didn't know how I was going to explain this to him. How do you tell your son that his mom walked out after betraying everything we built? I finally got up and knocked on his door. "Hey, bud, can we talk?" He pulled off his headphones and looked up at me, his expression curious but calm. "What's up?" I sat down on the edge of his bed, taking a deep breath. "Your mom, she won't be staying here anymore." Ethan's face fell, confusion clouding his eyes. "Why? What happened?" "It's complicated," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But she and we've been having problems. Big problems. She's decided to leave for a while." Ethan stared at me, his lip quivering slightly. "Is it because of me? Because I quit basketball?" My heart broke at his words. No, I said quickly, pulling him into a hug. "This has nothing to do with you, Ethan. None of this is your fault. Your mom and we just couldn't make things work." He sniffled, burying his face in my shoulder. "Is she coming back?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Over the next few weeks, life was a blur of adjustments. Ethan and I settled into a new routine: school, work, drum lessons. Jessica called a few times, but her conversations were brief and filled with empty reassurances about figuring things out. She didn't ask to see Ethan, and he didn't ask to see her. I threw myself into being there for my son. We'd always been close, but now it felt more important than ever to make sure he knew he wasn't alone. I helped him practice his drumming, cheered him on at school events, and even let him teach me a few things about music. One evening, as we were sitting on the couch watching a movie, Ethan turned to me and said, "I'm glad I'm staying with you, Dad." I smiled, ruffling his hair. "Me too, buddy." In the months that followed, the house started to feel like a home again. Jessica's absence was a heavy weight at first, but over time, it lightened. I realized that I didn't miss her as much as I thought I would. What I missed was the idea of what we'd once been, not the reality of who we'd become. Ethan flourished in his new passion, joining a local music group and even performing at a school talent show. Watching him play on stage, his face glowing with confidence, filled me with a pride I hadn't felt in a long time. As for me, I took things one day at a time. I started therapy, something I'd never considered before, and found it helped me process the anger and betrayal. I reconnected with old friends, took up jogging, and slowly began to rebuild my life. Jessica never came back. She moved in with Brad for a while, but from what I heard through the grapevine, things didn't work out. I didn't care to know the details. What mattered was that Ethan and I were okay. We'd been through hell, but we'd come out stronger on the other side. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ethan turned to me and said, "You know, Dad, I think things are better this way." I nodded, my heart swelling with gratitude. "Yeah, bud. I think so too." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.